What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast, and thank you so much for joining us on this epic adventure that we call writing. We're your hosts, Holly Robilliard.
And Austin Matthews.
And Bob, unfortunately, has ditched us for much better things this evening. I hope he's having an
Wow.
amazing time. I hope he's having an amazing time away from us.
Wow.
But
Just all
today,
the hate.
today we have a very special guest. We're going to be talking about urban fantasy with Dennis Crosby. Dennis, welcome.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I was telling you earlier, I love talking about writing, just in general. So it's always fun to get a chance to speak with people, talk about the craft, talk about the business, and just kind of, dig in and have fun. So thanks
Yeah,
again for having me.
absolutely. Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us a little bit about you, about your writing, everything. Tell us everything.
Everything. Well, way
Yes,
back
every.
in 19, no. Um, so my name's Dennis Crosby. I write under the name Dennis K Crosby. I use my middle initial for several reasons. One, I'm named after my uncle, and years and years ago, back when I lived in Illinois, our mail used to get mixed up, and
Mm.
I didn't want that to happen with my royalty checks. So
No.
I make sure that I use my middle initial. Plus, there is a Dennis Crosby who is Bing Crosby's son, or was Bing Crosby's son. So when
Mm.
you Google me and just put Dennis Crosby in, you're going to go down a whole Crosby family rabbit hole that is it's heavy. There's a lot of stuff there. So make sure you use the middle initial.
Well, there you
Um,
go.
yeah, I've been writing for I don't know, years. Kind of started back in college, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I just knew that I liked writing. I've always liked telling stories, and I don't think I got really serious about writing until probably about 12, 13 years ago, shortly before I moved from Chicago to San Diego. Um, I always wanted to write the definitive vampire novel. I
Mm.
love vampires, I love werewolves, all that stuff. And back then it was just fantasy to me. I didn't think of that as horror until I moved to San Diego and people told me, "Oh, that sounds like horror." I'm like, "Does it?" Because I hate ghosts. I hate horror movies. Um, and so I kind of realized, okay, maybe I write a little bit of horror, but I also like a little bit of fantasy. And I started to learn more just about the craft of writing. I
Mm.
started going to workshops, joining writing groups, and just meeting people, listening, learning about the craft, learning about the business of publishing. Um, it was probably around 2017, 16, no, 2016. I decided to go back to school to get my MFA. One,
Oh,
to learn more about writing, but also so that I could kind of keep myself honest with my writing, learn about deadlines, and
Mm. Hmm.
really learn more of the craft. And it was there that I my master's thesis came about. I was taking a screenwriting workshop, and I wrote this story about this woman who has these powers to escort souls to the afterlife, and she's an alcoholic, and she's got trouble in her relationships, and like it was just a fun kind of character to write about, to think about.
Hmm.
I write the script, and the script is okay. Um, Not great, but okay.
Hmm.
I got an A in the class, so it had to be, pretty good.
I was saying,
Um,
I think that's how everyone feels about their writing.
yeah.
Yeah.
I took screenwriting one and two, and kept working on that script. And what I realized was I liked that character, that story so much. I decided to elaborate on it, expand it, and it turned into my master's thesis. And then eventually it turned into my first published novel, Death's Legacy. Um, it combines everything that I love. I love Greek mythology.
Hmm.
I love people with powers and abilities, and I also love that real world stuff too. I like kind of taking those elements and putting it into the real world, which is exactly what urban fantasy is.
Right.
You're taking these magical pieces, you're taking all this supernatural stuff, and you're putting it like in real world situations.
Yeah. You put
Um,
it in the dirt of real life. So,
exactly. And so I like kind of exploring all of that. I always kind of knew that whatever I write was going to be going to have those elements in it. And so this was just kind of a natural extension for me to get through this novel. And Since then, I've been able to crank out two more, and I've got a fourth coming, but it's been a slow process. I've been
Mm.
busy with some other things, but there's a book four coming because I have to wrap up the storyline that I'm currently in. Otherwise, people will get upset. I had a four-part epilogue, and there's a lot of cliffhangers, so I can't leave people hanging.
Yeah, absolutely not.
So yeah, that's kind of the journey to what got me here so far. But I still, I still love learning. I still love learning about the craft. I still love, meeting other writers and talking about writing in and of itself. Um, it's just it's a blast. It's a great way to kind of tap into, what's going on inside of me and kind of
Mm-hmm.
giving a little commentary on what I see going on in the world as well without having to dig too deep and get lost in the muck.
Absolutely. I have a question,
Yeah.
but before I get to my question, I have to ask you,
Yeah.
where can our listeners find you if they want to see your work and things like that? How do we find you?
Yeah. So best place you can go to my website, which is denniskcrosby.com, and that'll give you links to my three novels. I've got nine published short stories in various anthologies too, most of which are horror. If you guys are looking for a horror take on Sanford and Son, 21 Jump Street, Soul Train, I've done it. I've written it. It's out there in the world.
Amazing.
I've got some haunted house stuff out there. But yeah, you can go to my website, denniskcrosby.com to find that. And if you're on social media, Dennis K. Crosby on Facebook, and I'm pretty active on Instagram. Also at Dennis K. Crosby. I post a lot of goofy stuff. I love memes. You know, they give me so much life. So I post a lot of goofy stuff. I try not to just be on there like selling, selling, selling. I want to have fun. I want people to kind of enjoy themselves when they come to my page. So
That's
yeah,
so good.
that's where you can find me. Yeah.
Awesome. That's amazing. Okay, my question, because
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. So going back to your name, you said that you have the K in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you got inspiration for your character, your main character's name? Because it's Cassidy, right? With a K.
With a K.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious now. That's immediately where my mind went.
Yeah. As I think about it, I'm not even sure where I came up with the name. I don't know when it popped in my head, but I do like taking names and kind of giving them unconventional spellings. Usually you see Cassidy's with a C. I liked, kind of something that's going to stand out a little bit.
Mhm.
There's also a character in my book named Jason Lucas, and I spell Jason Jacen.
Mm.
So that, it just kind of gives it a little different flair. So I do that a lot with main characters and kind of some side characters that could eventually become main characters. I just want them to, have a little extra, something that people can really remember.
Yeah, and I think one of those things, like, with writing is just the coming up with names is always a weird wrestling
Hmm.
match.
It is.
So something I enjoy is, like, I'll come up with, like, a naming convention that's, like, pretty typical, and I'm like, "Okay, like, these are all fantasy names." I write a lot
Yeah.
of high fantasy, and I'm
Hmm.
like, "But you know what else also fits in this naming convention? Marcus." So I'm just gonna throw a Marcus in here because that's totally cool too.
Marcus with a K.
Yeah, it actually is a Marcus with a K,
Nice.
so
Yes.
named after Marcus Aurelius, so
Perfect.
I
I
was
think that's, oh, go ahead.
I was struggling to name something today too, so I think I'm gonna have to go back to revisit this conversation in a little bit.
I've had people ask me about like how I come up with names at times, and I do like that kind of unconventional spelling.
Mhm.
I also take names of cities, and I think those are fun, and you can kind of switch those names. I have a character also named London, um,
Mhm.
and London James, and she's a very much a side character in this series, but she is a character that I actually have an entire novel written about. She's a vampire. Um, it needs a lot of work. So, and once I finally get, done with this, I can kind of dig into that a little bit more. But, so yeah, I'd like taking names of cities or, small towns. It's fun to just kind of mix and match, kind of take something that seems a little bit out there and then
Mhm.
spice it up a little bit with something, fun and cutesy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about like city names too, like taking a city name and using it for a character, but like thinking about putting your characters in cities,
Hmm.
like people can get wild and crazy with it because like I live in Texas, and so like we have a cut and shoot Texas. Like there's all sorts of weird
Is there
names out
really?
there. But there's also Fred, Texas. So,
Is there? Are you serious?
yeah.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So just going through, just like scroll through Google Maps and find yourself a fun name for either
Yeah,
your, setting or for your characters. And yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of cities, I know you touched on it a little bit already, but since we're talking about urban fantasy today, what exactly is urban fantasy? Like if someone was coming in and had never heard of it before,
Yeah.
how would you explain it to them?
I would tell them that it is, you're taking what's typically thought of as fantasy. Most people, when you think of fantasy, you're thinking of, magical beings, people with all kinds of powers and abilities, maybe immortals. You're thinking of ancient gods, but you're thinking of magical or supernatural elements, and you're taking that particular world and you're basically putting it into modern day society. So for mine basically takes a lot of Greek mythology elements. Some other religions are kind of woven in there as well. But I take all that and I put it basically in modern day Chicago. Um, Others like that. Percy Jackson is very much like that. Percy Jackson was
Mhm.
actually very much an influence for me. I loved that series. And I thought about writing a YA series, kind of based on that. But I'm not mature enough yet to write YA. I need I need to get a little better with that. So I decided to kind of take that world and make it an adult world, full of adult problems, and then put it, like I said, smack dab in the middle of a city, a major city.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's fun too because you can you can play with the history of that city. If
Mhm.
there's a lot of mystery in that city, you can kind of use that supernatural piece to say, well, that's why that mystery exists. That's what happened. Chicago had a great fire, back in the early
Mhm.
1900s. I can literally take a magical element and say that was the cause of the fire, not some cow kicking over a lantern.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun to kind of play with history in that matter.
Do you feel like it's similar in a way to like regular fantasy in that you have magic systems and there's certain rules that you have to follow within your writing or within the book, or do you not include like specific magic systems or um
I think you have to some degree. Like you have to have rules. You can't just have all these magical creatures kind of just running amok in the city. Um, and then it gets if there's no rules, then readers can't really get into the characters. Because
Mhm.
you don't want to have all powerful characters where just everything is up for grabs and anything can happen. You've got to have rules, weaknesses, things that can kind of humanize those characters so that readers can relate. They've got to have some type of human connection to it. Because, plots are plots, right? Plots are what's going
Mhm.
to sell the book, essentially. But what gets people to buy the book and what gets people interested in the story and buying the next book is actually the characters. So, yeah, if they can do anything, well, what's the point of writing about them? So yeah, they've got to be some kind of system, some kind of set of rules that people can or can't cross, because that then kind of adds to the plot, adds to the tension, adds to the potential conflict in the story.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm reading a book is when something happens and they're like, "Oh, this happened now, and it's magic and it happened."
Right.
And I'm like, "This is the easiest way for this writer to get out of this situation." And I have never been more disappointed in my life.
Well, speaking of that, not to be really rude to the author, but man, I just finished reading The Eye of the World, and the end of it felt very like, oh, suddenly you've got all the power in the universe and you're good to go. Don't worry about it. And I was like, I just read a really long book for this. And so yeah, it's a big pet peeve.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of not cheapens it. It just there's got to be more to it. There's got to be something
Hmm.
again that draws you back in. And like my character Cassidy, she's an empath as well, right? So that's kind of how she grew up as a kid. She was able to sense everybody's emotions, but like seriously sense them to the point where it became debilitating. So
Mm.
like she can't go to weddings because it's too exciting.
Mm.
There's too much happiness there. She can't go to funerals for the exact opposite reason. It's too sad. And she hates going to hospitals because, somewhere in that hospital, somebody's dying, somebody's grieving, somebody's, hurting.
Wow.
And so there's a scene in early on in the book where she tries to go into a hospital, but she can't. She starts to feel this pain, like it becomes a physical pain, which what she's sensing. And then by the end of the book, she's got a better handle on things and things have kind of turned around a little bit. So she's finally able to make that leap. But I also make sure that I end the book with some questions about what could happen next. She
Hmm.
defeated the big bad, but maybe there's another big bad in there, right? So you want to kind of leave something in there that says, "Oh, this isn't done." She might, have elevated, she might have all these powers now, but there's something bigger and badder coming after her, and that feels a bit more satisfying because it's not like you've just given the world to your character and they can
Yeah.
just do anything and be anything.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of like we were talking earlier about like the real life problems. And so like it always makes me think of like the Iron Man series in the comic books where it's like he
Hmm.
really wrestles with his drinking problem
Right.
for like a whole
Exactly.
story arc. And so like yeah, like maybe your character beats the big bad guy, but if like there's a human cost to it, like they might be struggling with all sorts of addiction and like what
Hmm.
ifs and like I could have done more and like just the guilt of like everybody that died along the way or like got injured or whatever. Like all
Exactly.
their small failings really pile up. So
Exactly. And I think that's part of the beauty of urban fantasy is that yeah, you've got the fantasy part, but it's in the real world and there's real problems.
mhm.
Even if you have amazing powers and abilities, you still have to deal with those real problems. And that's I
Mhm.
think that's where the connection is with the reader. And that's kind of how you get them to love your character and get to want to follow them in whatever, fiery inferno they go into.
I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting way to look at like a magical power or something as well is by it being a negative thing, right? I feel like
Hmm.
so often when we write our characters, get this power and it's like, wow, this power is amazing and I'm going to use it, but it's
Mhm.
never we never really think about it in the opposite way. Like, how is this affecting my life or how is
Yeah,
this affecting our character's life in a negative way?
Yeah.
exactly.
And so that's a really cool way to think about it because that's a whole completely different character arc.
Hmm.
Yeah. It
It.
was oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's part of them trying to reconcile who they are and what their place is in life. Are they
Mhm.
just this being with these abilities, or are they human? Are they not
Mhm.
human? What exactly is it that they are meant to do? And that struggle, I think, is something that we all deal with. So
Mhm.
why wouldn't a character just because they have abilities not deal with that as well?
Yeah, and, like, that's something too that I'm dealing with one of my works in progress is, that whole question of, like, if you could have any superpower in the world, what would you choose? And it's like,
Hmm.
well, it depends what world I'm living in. If it's me in my normal world, it's gonna have to be something that nobody's ever gonna notice because, like, I don't wanna get rounded up by the government and experimented on. Like, that's a really real thing. Like, if somebody just, like, starts having superpowers in our world,
Yes,
they're gonna get disappeared, and so, like, that's
exactly.
the whole plot of this story is that, like, people start having superpowers, and then if they don't hide it, then, yeah, they just get rounded up, so
Yep. Yep. And it's a great source of conflict too. Let's say,
mhm.
you start growing wings out of your back, you're like, uh-oh,
What do I do?
this is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
This is totally off topic, but I recently started watching that show called Lucifer, and that's what that makes
Oh,
me
Mhm.
think of how
I
like
love Lucifer.
I have
Yeah.
never seen it and I started watching it and I'm absolutely addicted now. I'm like binging the whole series. But it makes me think of that how like it's funny how he tells some people that he's the devil and
Hmm.
people are like, no, you're not. It
Yeah.
doesn't exist. But then there's other people who will freaking lose their minds, right? So I'm like, it just makes me think of like that's probably how some people would react. Like most people would freak out, but some people would just be like, nah, you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. that series is fantastic. I'm so sad that it's over, but I thought it was. I love the dynamic. I love the character Lucifer in and of himself. It was just
Mhm.
there's a lot of charisma there, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of questions, and what I love most about shows like that and shows with people with abilities and things is like, what would I do if I had those? It's always that what if thing. Like, how far would I go? What would I do with those abilities? You're also you're talking about like what power would you have? Let's say you did have the power, then what would you do with it?
Hmm.
And I always get to thinking about that when I'm watching a show or reading a book or even or writing a story myself. What would I do if I had that particular power and ability?
Yeah, and
So
like something. Oh, good.
no, you go ahead first. I was going
Right.
to talk about something
So
else. So
oh, okay. Well, so, like, as hard as I was on the Eye of the World, like, it did make a really good point there at the end where the character's like, "Well, was I using the power, or was the power using me too?" And so, like, getting into
Yeah.
that of, like, if you do have this, magic in our world, well,
Hmm.
like, is it you getting to control those things, or you can get really into the psychology of, like, what is happening? Is
Yeah.
the power corrupting you, and
Yep.
what is in control?
Yeah. I like that thought process too, that kind of dynamic. And um, the what was what's the saying? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mhm.
That always goes in my head sometimes when I'm writing a character because if they have abilities, okay, cool. Like, what are they going to do with them? And then, like, how far are they going to go? How
Mhm.
far will they go to kind of to potentially to in their mind fix things? There's actually a scene in my book in Death's Legacy where Cassidy now has this ability to make things right, for lack of a better term, and she has to struggle with whether or not to do that. Is that the right thing to do? Is it not?
Mhm.
What would you do? And I wrote it specifically because, like, what would I do? I don't know. If I don't have
yeah,
any
that's
consequences to worry about,
Yeah,
I
it's
might.
hard until you're in that situation.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things that's great about being an author is, like, trying to put yourself in those
Hmm.
situations that, like, we'll never be faced with, hopefully.
Right.
God, if I had to face, even 1% of the things I put my characters through,
Oh
I'd be
God,
done.
I couldn't imagine.
one of the things that I love about writing fantasy is that I have this mindset where I'm like, if I want something to be this way, then it's fantasy. So even if it's not real, it can be
Mm,
that way because I'm writing the book.
Mm,
It's my fantasy. It is fantasy. So I can make it happen. If I want there to
yeah.
be coffee, is my favorite example. If I want there to be coffee, there will be coffee, right? Um,
Yeah, it's not blood,
and
there will be coffee.
yeah. And so my thought or my question, I guess, is that how
Mm,
important is research for writing an urban fantasy? Because you have those fantasy elements, but because it's taking place in an urban area, that's real.
Hmm.
Whereas, straight fantasy is essentially it's all made up with
Yeah.
some realistic elements. So how important is it to do research
It's
when you're preparing for one of these urban fantasy novels?
yeah. It's crucial. Particularly for my series because there's Greek mythology involved, and so I have to make sure that I can still play with those myths, but I need to get the basics right. I have to make sure that the basics are still there. I can
mhm,
certainly go off on tangents if I choose because, it's mythology. It's not like I'm going to get sued for, switching some things around. But I do want to at least make um, close to what people have heard, and then I can toy with it a little bit. So, and that's a thing that I love. I've been living in Greek mythology since I was like 8 years old. So I just love that world. Um, in the cities that you set them in, you definitely want to do research because if I lived in and around Chicagoland area, so I grew up in a suburb right next door, Oak Park. But I worked in Chicago. I was in Chicago, often for whatever. So I know the city well. I know the surrounding suburbs pretty well. And so it's important to make sure that I get those elements correctly. If I haven't been there in a while, or if I haven't been to an area in a while, I make sure that when I fly back home, I go and check that area out, or
mm,
I do a Google search. I might ask a friend, "Hey, take a drive around so and so and take some photos for me." So I want to make sure that I get those components right because it's the right thing to do for the area, not just for the story, but you want to
mhm.
get the area right. And then with the characters, I think it is crucial that you do research. Um, if your character is not like you, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
writing about a female. I am not a female. I'm writing about a female who is white and bisexual. I am neither of those things. Um, and so I have to make sure that I get those elements right, right?
Mm-hmm.
I cannot go and stereotype what I think it means to be a woman. I cannot stereotype what I think it means to be a bisexual woman. I have to make sure that I get those elements correct. And so I talk to people that are of that community and make sure that I get those elements correct. Um, I give them snippets. I talk about things that I'm thinking about in terms of the character and her relationship, um, good or bad in that relationship. I just have to make sure that it feels like something that is actually real. And again, I don't want to fall into a stereotype. I don't want it to seem like I'm writing about a woman and make it feel like a man wrote it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
um, you don't want to fall into those traps. So research is crucial, I think, in anything that you write. And if you're going to go into fantasy, you want to make sure that you plan some things and plot certain things so that there's continuity. You
Mm.
don't want to say something on page 56 and then say something completely opposite on page 250
Mhm.
because you didn't have that continuity in there. So yeah, research I think is key for everything.
So speaking of plotting, are you like a full planner then? I love asking everyone this question because I'm a combination of both, and I'm pretty sure that Austin just wings it and comes up with all these like amazing things. I don't know how he does it.
I am also both. I so when I start a new story, I have an idea of my character. I have an idea of who the character is. I have kind of a vague idea of the overall story, like where it's going to start, where it's going to end, but I don't necessarily know the middle parts yet.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as I have something to start with, I just start writing. And I go and I go and I go.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come to a point where I'm stuck. And I'm like, all right, where is this thing going? What have I been doing for the last, 20,000 words?
Mm-hmm.
And it's at that point that I pull back and
Yeah.
then I start outlining what I've written so far. I
Mm-hmm.
know I outline the end. And when I say outline, I take 3x5 note cards and I just jot a couple sentences down. I jot the emotions that I want to make sure I capture and any important plot points I need to have happen, and that's it.
Mm.
And so I have one of those for each chapter. So I'll plot out what I've written so far. I'll plot out kind of the ending, and then that'll help inform the rest of it in the middle. And I'll typically follow that the rest of the way. Sometimes I'll make some changes because things just feel better, as you go. But I definitely do a little bit of both. And then I also, like I just said, is I make sure that there's their continuity. I want to make sure if I've said something about their abilities here, I don't automatically change that later on
Mhm.
without a reason for changing that. There's got to be something that lends to the plot to make sure that there's a break in the rules, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think something too is like because I'm very big on just going by the seat of my pants, and so like I just start with like characters and their motivations for like
Hmm.
all the different ones, and they just play with each other, and we see what
Yeah,
happens, and
yeah.
some of them end up dead. But I think like with that, you have to really understand that like the words that you write aren't sacred or precious. They can
Hmm.
be destroyed because sometimes that's better. Like I
Yep.
had a professor in college that was for a ceramics class, and you had to set all your pieces out for a project, and then he would make you push one of them off the edge to destroy it because he's like, everything you make is not precious, and if it's got flaws, it's okay. You can start over.
That's a harsh lesson.
It's a harsh lesson, but it's a really good one.
It's a great lesson, yes, but that would do it. Um,
I mean, especially for a 100 level class, like nothing you make is necessarily worth keeping.
no, I think that's important too. I think writers. I was like this, when I first started. I've always loved writing since I was a kid, and writing papers for class is a lot different, obviously
Mm,
than writing, a novel. I was very cocky as a writer because everything I wrote, I got excellent marks on, and I got comments from the teacher.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like, oh, this writing thing is a piece of cake, you know?
Yeah.
And I start writing a book. I'm like, oh, this is not like writing a paper at all. This is very strange. And so that's when I kind of had to pull back and learn more and make sure that I appreciate the craft and everything that goes into, the creation of that product. But I don't think enough writers take into account that if you're gonna write, just write, get it out. You
Hmm.
you can't edit a blank page, as they say.
Hmm.
But if you put something together, put it together and then come back and change it after it's done. You can move things around. You can change a plot point. You can delete an entire chapter, but you're not going to really know what to do until you've actually got the products in front of you. And sometimes that's the hard part. People want it to be perfect the first time out, and it's
Hmm.
never going to be perfect. Even when you're done with it, your final draft is not going to be perfect.
Yep.
Um, but you want to get it, obviously as perfect as you can. And you only do that once you've got something out that you can really work with and play with.
Yeah, and I think people are so like everything needs to be like perfectly in place. I don't want to write anything that's not going to end up in my final story. But I'm like, a
Yeah.
lot of the chapters that I write that don't end up there, like, still really help me understand the character better.
Hmm.
And then, like, that informs the character you see on the page.
Exactly. Exactly. And you can use some of those pieces too. Like I've taken things that I've written, not used them, but then use them in a short story.
Hmm.
And it's worked out for that particular story. Nothing that you write is complete crap. It has a use somewhere. It came in your mind for a reason. So maybe it doesn't work for that story, but it might work for another story. I save everything that I, quote unquote, throw away because
Yeah.
I never
Don't
know
delete,
when it's going
cut
to
and
come again.
paste.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that was really something that I struggled with when I first started writing. So I originally, when I first started writing a trilogy, and I spent so much time planning everything out. Like I did all of my research and I figured out all my different places and I
Hmm.
really fleshed everything out because I just wanted everything to be perfect.
Hmm.
And then when I started writing it, I kept getting caught up, writing one chapter and then going through and editing it again.
Yeah.
And I was never getting any further.
Hmm.
And I put that whole project on hold to do a November project. And with the November project, I just had an idea and I just went with it. And I still did a rough outline. So I knew where I was going, but
Sure.
I didn't flesh the world out. I didn't really figure any of the finer details out.
Hmm.
And I just went through and I wrote the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that for me completely changed the way that I viewed writing because I was able to actually get things on paper. And now as I'm going through and editing, I'm making those little changes and
Exactly.
I'm realizing like, I wish I had planned it out a little bit better or,
Hmm.
fleshed it out a little bit more. But with that being said, if I had, I don't know that I would have gotten through the whole thing at this point because
Right.
I
Yep.
would still be trying to figure all these little things out, like little names or
Yep.
things
Hmm.
like that, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
I
it's
will say,
really, really interesting.
yeah, I'm probably a freak of nature that, like, I love editing maybe more than I like writing. And so I'm like, if I can get through the first draft as fast as possible, then I'm ready to start the wonderful process that is the endless editing.
Yeah.
So,
I don't mind editing either. I used to get caught up in editing along the way, and then I
mhm.
finally realized I can't do that. I have a lot of friends
Yeah,
that
that's
do
the
the same
problem.
thing that you just talked about, Holly, which is you write a chapter and then you edit it before you go to the next one. And I don't understand how they manage to get their books done, but they somehow they do. But it's just not a process that works for me because I know I will get too caught up in the minutia and I will not ever see the end of that novel.
Mm.
Um, so I think sometimes it works for some and for others not so much.
Yeah.
I will edit along the way in the sense that I will write a note within the manuscript. So if I'm writing and
Mm.
I'm like, I need to have something here. I don't know what it is, but I'll put in a note says, okay, you need to have a plot point here. You have to have a name here, or something needs to happen here. I'll put that on the side, and then I'll keep going beyond that. And then once I finish the manuscript, I will go back to the second read, and then I'll come to that
Mhm.
point. I'm like, okay, this is what needs to happen here, and so on. I've only really done that, I think, in recent years, and it's helpful. It really helps kind of move me forward and get through that manuscript.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's like a really good suggestion to just leave a little footnote or something there to
Hmm.
remind you. Because again, like the hard thing with going back and editing one chapter is I'm finding that you don't necessarily know when you want to mention certain things, or, you
Yeah.
have your character arc and it's like, do I want it to start, tipping here, or do I want it to start tipping back here? And you
Right.
don't know those things when you're editing until you get through the whole book,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you have a plan for your book, it's amazing how words just seem to add up. So what you think is going to be the middle of your book might only be the first third.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, for me, it's really changed the way that I've looked at my writing.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes things change along the way. I can put a loose outline together, and then I get to a certain point. I'm like, no, this is a better idea. And well, now I got to get rid of 2 or 3 note cards and redo them. But you have to be open to that process too. You can't
Mhm.
be so strict and dogmatic in your thinking that you can't make adjustments, because you certainly can. You can make adjustments. You can make adjustments after you're done. Do a second edition if you want,
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think doing it doing it after everything is done, there's kind of a sense of accomplishment, right? When you finish a manuscript and you write the end at the bottom, there's something there that says, oh my God, I got through this. I just wrapped up 85,000 words, and wow, now I need a break. I take a couple weeks, I chill out, I don't think about it. Sometimes I'll take a month even, and then I'll kind of not so much forget about it, but just kind of get out of that mindset, and then I'll come back to it, and that's when my first edit begins.
Mhm.
And I kind of come at it with some fresh eyes, and I'm not as close to it as I was, when I was
Yeah.
writing that first draft.
Well, and you get to, like, hone in on it a little bit more too. So it's like I feel like
Yep.
writing the rough draft is like being in the middle of a football game, and then it's like once you finish, it's like, okay, you can take a breather, and then you
Hmm.
watch the game footage later, and you're like, okay, these are the things I need to work on,
Yep.
and I'm just gonna drill down on those. I'm gonna kind of leave the good things where they are and just move to like, I really
Exactly.
effed up the beginning, and let me go move some things around.
Yep. That's it. Exactly. That's it. Exactly.
I knew I left a few things out of my first draft that I definitely wanted to put in there. So now I'm going through it. I don't really, it's an edit, but it's not really an
Mm.
edit. It's just a second draft. I'm editing as I'm going, but just very lightly, and then adding in these missing pieces.
Hmm.
But I really want to finish this part because I would like to just push it off to the side, and I really want to just read the whole thing straight through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
trying to avoid, I can't do it right now because I know things are missing. So I'm like, I'm just waiting, and I'm really trying to plug away at this so that I can finish it and just read it through for the first time, because
Yeah. Yeah.
you live and breathe these books, and
Oh my
you
God.
get
So
so
much.
excited.
Hmm. Yes. Yes, indeed. It's sometimes in the process of writing, I hate it because I'm so anxious to get to the end,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
but I appreciate the fact that I hated it and I took that much time once I'm done, because now I know that I can do it. I know I can accomplish something. I know that I can take something word by word by word and create this story in this universe that, is fun and terrifying, and yeah, it's a love-hate relationship. I love it overall. But I'm a Taurus, so I'm very impatient, and I want things to be done like now. Like I think about a story, I'm like, why isn't this already done? Why can't I just pull it out and put it on the paper and walk away? That's
Like
probably the
that.
superpower I'd have, is to automatically have my thoughts just become a manuscript overnight. Perfect.
Yeah, and
No
then all
more
you have to do is
editing.
pick it up and read it.
All I got to do is, find an agent, have them sell it, and then I'm done. I'm good.
Perfect.
Yeah, the easy part.
The
The
easy
easy
part.
part.
Yeah.
If only.
So, do you have any specific tips for someone who would want to write in the urban fantasy genre, or is there anything that you wish that you had known when you started?
Um, the only tip I really have is to read it. Read the
Mm,
genre, read some different, points of view. Watch some movies and TV shows even, because that can very much influence you. I mentioned earlier how, like, I was influenced by Percy Jackson. I've been influenced by Chloe Neal and her Chicagoland Vampire series. Um, Laurel K. Hamilton is phenomenal. You know, her stuff is just it's gritty and it's really it's gritty, it's fun, and it's deep, it's dark. Um, so you know, I've read a lot of that. I've also watched a lot of television shows that are essentially urban fantasy
Mhm.
and movies as well. And so just kind of know the world of that genre, you know, kind of know what the audience looks for. Um, but after that, you know, have fun in it too. I
Mhm.
think that's really the key. Don't feel like you have to get bogged down um, and copy something or make it, you know, something that you know is popular. Take some elements of all those things and kind of throw them together to make um, your own story. Um, so I mean, that's really the only kind of advice I would give. What was the second part of your question?
Just if you like, if someone was specifically wanting to write in this genre, like what would your advice for them be? Like,
Yeah,
how to get started or something that you maybe wish you had known
something I wish I had
before.
known. Uh,
I mean,
it's a
because
good
you really
question.
started in urban fantasy in a way anyways, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, for the most part. I think not so much something I wish I had known, but I think it's probably another piece of advice, which is to be open-minded and realize that you know, your work is yours. It is your baby. You can do what you want with it, but be open to the advice that you're going to get from editors. Um, be open to feedback you might get from beta readers, other people. Like if you're in a critique group, you know, be open to that too. Realize that there might be some things that you might need to move around. Don't be so kind of focused on your story. Um, Realize that there's some elements in there that you might need to change out for the sake of the story,
Mhm.
to make the story better, to make it richer. So, and I think I was fortunate enough to really understand a lot of that. I did just a ton of groups and workshops before I really kind of dug into these stories in particular. But before I thought about even like, you know, sending work out and you know, getting feedback from editors and agents and all those things, I made sure that I knew enough and I was realistic about what was out there, what could possibly happen. So I think, yeah, it just be open. I think that's just another piece of advice um, that I would take. The other thing I think I wasn't prepared for was the amount of time.
mm,
Um, Most writers have day jobs, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I know very few that, I mean, I do know a few that the writing is how they make their living, but most of the writers I know, you know, have day jobs as well. And so, you know, time management, I think, is a thing. And it's something that you absolutely want to be prepared for. So, um, don't feel like you have to write every day. I those are the rules, right? Everyone says you got to write every
yes.
day. If you're writing, you got to write every day. If you're not writing every day, you're not writing. You're not a writer. I don't subscribe to that. Um, I don't set daily word counts anymore because it's too much. If I
Mm.
go to work and I'm working 8, 9, 10 hours, I'm not coming home to write. I'm coming home to relax. And so I set weekly goals for myself instead. So
That's good.
I know what word count I want for that novel. I know kind of an idea of when I want to finish it. I divide that up by week and I have a
Mhm.
weekly count. That way, if I write more on a Tuesday, maybe I can take a Wednesday off. Or if I don't write enough on Wednesday, I've got Thursday to you know back it up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
really
really
like
good.
that. Yeah. I think
Yeah, I
Having a
that was
rhythm.
go ahead.
We're all open.
that was one of the things that I learned when we started this November project is I was giving myself little goals to follow to make sure that I was actually staying on track with
Hmm.
finishing this little project, which turned into a whole book. Um,
Mhm.
and it was by setting myself like some sort of guideline for what I had hoped to accomplish,
Hmm.
it had made me a little bit more accountable for my writing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that I was like, okay, I'm writing this many words every
Yeah.
day. it was like, all right, so I know like in this period, I'm gonna get this much done, whether
Right.
it's like divided into chapters or word count or
Mhm.
whatever. And it
Exactly.
just really, really helped me monitor my progress. And it was interesting as well to see like what parts I had finished and what times. And I could see the difference in my work where it was like, I got like a ton of words done,
Hmm.
but the quality wasn't, as good as when I got less done, but
Yes.
better quality, right?
Mhm.
I look at that too. Like if I'll go out and I rarely write at home because it's very difficult. I think of home as like my sanctuary. I can write little things. I can write short stories at home. But if I'm working on a book, I got to get out of the house. So I go to very cliche. I go to the coffee house or something, and I set up and I'll write. And I will try like if I'm going to write any session, I try to make sure I get at least 1,000 words in that session. If I do more, great. But I try to at least hit that particular number. And I've had some days where I've written upwards of 4 or 5,000 words, and I think kind of to your point, Ollie, when I look at that later on, I'm like, man, I was just like throwing stuff together.
Yeah.
This doesn't even feel right. This is the same story. Because I was trying to force some things, and I
Mhm.
got I got into a groove, and I got excited, and I kept going, but I shouldn't have. I should have stopped and then come back either later in the day or the next day. Because as I kept going, I just got excited. I kind of jumped to some things, and once I went back and edited, I'm like, I can't have this happen yet. I have to
Yeah.
Mhm.
spread this out. I got to move this over.
Yep.
So yeah, I think in those shorter bursts, there's much more cohesiveness, and
Mhm.
it feels better, it flows better, and then I'm able to just kind of move on.
Well, I forgot to warn you about this earlier. Um,
Uh-oh.
so this is the part of our show where we'd like to do like a don't session. So for someone new in the genre, what we don't recommend that you do when you're writing urban fantasy.
What
Um, so if you want to just mull that over for a second, that was that was my fault. Um,
that's okay. Um, don't. I
I
don't
think for
limit yourself.
me, okay, yeah, that's a good
There
one.
you
Yeah, I
go.
like that.
Here's the beauty of fantasy. You can, to some degree, you can go over the top.
Mm.
You can have, your refrigerator door open and it goes into a magical world. You can do that. So don't limit yourself. Write whatever comes to mind, edit it later. Put it out there, see if it fits, see if it flows with the story. And if it does, go with it. If it doesn't, pull back. But don't limit yourself because you don't think readers are going to like it or the market's going to like it. You have to essentially write the story that speaks to you or that speaks through you. So I would say, yeah, that's crucial. don't
Mm.
don't limit yourself.
I like that a lot. That's a good way. It's a good perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Uh,
writing. I used to get caught up in what the trend was in the market and what's hot right now. I got to get this done. I got to get this out
Mm.
while this trend is hot. And I learned, through again these workshops and these groups that you can't chase those trends because by the time your book is
Yeah.
done, that trend's gone.
yeah.
Yeah, unless you
So
can start and end within a month,
yeah, exactly.
you're not gonna have luck.
Exactly. So, stay true to yourself and the story and let the story kind of unfurl as it's meant to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, um, and this is coming from someone who knows really nothing about urban fantasy except for the very few urban fantasy novels that I've read.
Hmm.
However, I think that there's two ways you can do it. And the one way is where you have an entire world that just has modern technology in it,
Hmm.
or you can have, a whole city that, or like, San Francisco or whatever that contains magic. And I
Hmm.
think either way, no matter which direction you choose to go in, make sure that you don't just throw a city out there and then just be like magic.
Yeah.
like magic's right there beside it. Like they have to
Yeah.
be cohesive with each
Yes.
other. And like this is I mean, I love Harry Potter. And I think
I
that's
was
like I
gonna
know
bring that up
Austin,
in
I'm so
mine
sorry.
too. No, it's fine. I was gonna bring up Harry Potter in mine, so go for it.
It's very much like there's like a huge division, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Where like the wizarding world is entirely separate from everything else. And as
Hmm.
much as I loved Harry Potter, that for me was like, I wonder what it would be like if this world just really blended together. I
Yeah.
think that's what, because that would just be a whole other level to the story, right? So that for me is like the perfect example of don't just throw a world here and then have the
Hmm.
magic separate. Like they need to be cohesive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my thing was going to be thinking about Harry Potter too is like don't forget to think about the consequences of like having your magic in that setting because like
Yes.
it got away with it in Harry Potter because it was pre cell phones and pre a bunch of teenagers at a wizarding school having Instagram. Um, but you had to think about, like, how do you have a secret magic society in today's world,
Hmm.
without just basically turning the entire human world into sheep and erasing their memories? Like, and that's got ethical issues written all over it. And if that's the world you're living in, you might wanna address it a little bit. So don't gloss over that stuff because it's really juicy story stuff.
Yeah.
So it could be that, like, the Ministry of Magic is turning everybody into sheeple, and that's your plot. Like, that's
Exactly. I
fun.
was just going to say that that could be part of that conflict that drives the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1984 with magic.
Right.
Hmm.
You're right. And yeah, it should, good urban fantasy blends. I was saying earlier about, when you've got these magical elements and you put them in the real world, it really gives you a chance to kind of explore the history of
Mhm.
that city that you're in. And you can take, points in that history and assign magical causes to what happened. One of the things I love about Percy Jackson is, as Percy's going through his adventures, like sometimes they'll talk about other demigods that have been, alive in history. It's like, yeah, some of them have been presidents, some of them have been, famous world leaders, famous actors. And you're like,
Mhm.
oh, that's so cool. Like, what if George Clooney was a demigod? What if Denzel Washington is like Zeus's son? That's awesome.
Mhm.
So it kind of gives you more to wonder, and it makes that entire tale that more fantastic.
Yeah.
I just yeah, I love those pieces that can be kind of woven in when you're
Mhm.
putting that together.
Yeah, and you can also put, like, different, tints on it too, because like, I feel like a lot of urban fantasy that I've seen is, like, pretty optimistic, but you can see my brain instantly went, "Oh, yeah, definitely YA dystopia." Like, that is what magic plus modern world is dystopia. So, like, don't be afraid to put your own spin on it, so
Absolutely, absolutely. Just because it isn't out there, you might start a whole new trend, or reignite a trend. I think like that's what I meant by don't limit yourself. Whatever's
Mhm,
in your
exactly.
head,
Yeah,
put it
just go
out
for it.
there. Yeah, and if it seems too far fetched, it might not be if you blend the story right. If you kind of give a reason as to why there's a world in your refrigerator, it won't seem so crazy when you open it up and actually see it. So, put it out there. Just let it fly and then fix it later.
Goodness, man, you saying the world in your refrigerator, and I'm like, "Man, it's the unpublished Chronicle of Narnia book."
Yeah, maybe a reboot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's The Lion, the Witch, and the
And the
Refrigerator
fridge and the
in an ice
Kenmore.
box, yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right, Dennis. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing. One more time, where can everyone find you?
You can find me at denniskcrosby.com. Again, it's my website. It's got links to my books, my short stories, and all my social media. I've got interviews I've done on there, podcasts, all that fun stuff. Um, and then on socials, I'm typically just at Dennis K Crosby, even Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. Instagram, especially, I'm very heavy on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Well, everyone, don't forget to write and subscribe to our channels at the link below so you don't miss any of our Writers Realm content. We always love to hear from you guys. If you have a question or a topic that you want us to talk about, please get in touch and we'll dive into it maybe next time. Thank you again, Dennis, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
And end recording.
Woo. All right, that was fun.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an absolute blast.
I had fun.
I learned so much. I'm already inspired to go do some more writing.
Man, it really makes me want to get back into writing urban fantasy too. So
It is a fun genre. It's, I joke around with some of my friends. I've killed a lot of my friends in my books. So, I will put a post on Facebook and say, hey, anybody want to die in this book? And I say the first 3 people that say yes, your names are going in. And so I've killed some folks, and I'm like, hey, it's fantasy. I can bring you back if I want, or if you're nice to me.
Oh man, if I bring people back, it's not good.
It is not good. I
know?
bought one guy back in book 3. He died in book 1. I bought him back in book 3, but he's not. It's going to be rough for him in 4. He came in, and then shit hit the fan. And in book 4, it's gonna hurt a little bit more for him. But
Oh, you didn't quite pet cemetery him?
I not exactly. Yeah, it's
Okay.
all about soul and possession, and
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. But you can do those things with fantasy. Don't
Yep.
break too many rules, but if you do, make sure there's a reason. There was a reason why this rule got broken. But for the most part, you can do almost anything you want. I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. I have a whole series that takes place in my underworld because I do love me some mythology.
Yeah.
So it's fun. Because then because I've got 9 different, worlds or series or whatever. So I can take all the people that died in all of them and be like, you get a new series.
Yeah, exactly.
Greatest hits.
That's awesome. Greatest hits.
That's the best part too, is when you've got fun side characters and you
Mm-hmm.
can write short stories with them, or give them a whole series, spin-off. And I'm planning to actually do that with a couple characters in mind. So
That's
yeah,
fun.
it is a lot of fun to kind of build your own universe and have all those people play in it in different areas.
Yeah, my first book had several different POV characters, and one of them died. And then
Mm,
it came to a chapter, and it had his name as the POV. And it's like, okay, well, it's him in the underworld for one chapter for like 3 pages, and you get a glimpse of
nice.
what the underworld's like. And
That's
it's like,
awesome.
oh, and then we're going back to the real world, and you don't see him the rest of the story. It's like this
That's
is what waits
awesome.
for everybody.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
just put some stakes in there.
God.
All right. Well, it was a joy, Dennis.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know when this episode's going out. So
Okay.
I think it's scheduled
Bob will
for
let you
next
know.
Tuesday,
Is
but
it
yeah,
next Tuesday?
I think so.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Perfect then, next Tuesday.
Sounds good.
And if you have any questions, just get in touch with one of us or Bob, who is I didn't realize how much he really herds the sheep on this one.
Well, and it's funny because I
Now
feel
I
like he
know.
writes a lot of urban fantasy, so
He
it's
does,
good to
yeah.
meet
Yeah.
here.
His whole
Yeah.
series is so.
Yep.
He
So
messaged me today. He's like, "Man, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be." I'm like, "Well, okay, it's cool." I said, John Cleese, I get it. I mean, of course, go.
yeah,
It's going to be all right.
And
yeah,
besides that, it just means that we're just gonna have to have you back sooner rather than
exactly.
later. So
So yeah,
Anytime. I am always available. I'm
especially if
actually,
you ever have anything to pitch, for sure come back or
yeah,
help you promote.
I'm starting. Well, I'm not start. Actually, starting the query process. I wrote a mystery novel. Um,
oh,
and so I'm going to reach out to a few agents. I'm going to try to. Most of my stuff is indie published. I work with a hybrid publisher,
Hmm.
so it's technically indie. I don't have an agent, so I'm going to hopefully use this mystery novel to try to break into some traditional publishing.
Oh, nice.
Um, so yeah, it was a journey writing that. So if you guys ever do a mystery podcast, give me a shout. Happy to kind of
Yeah,
talk about that a bit.
perfect.
absolutely. I don't think we've done one yet, so I'm
No,
gonna put that on
haven't.
the list.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome. Well, we will be in touch and everybody have a good night.
Sounds
Yeah,
good. You guys take care. Thanks again
You
for tonight.
too.
of
Thank
course.
you.
Bye.
All right,
Bye.
bye.